The day my brother demanded a DNA test wasn't the worst day of my life. The worst day came 3 weeks later, when a lawyer slid a sealed envelope across a polished conference table and quietly said, "Mr. Walker, your father never lied to you." My brother's face lost all color before anyone even opened the file. At that moment, I still thought the DNA results were about proving I belonged in the family. I had no idea they were about proving someone else didn't. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, everyone knew my older brother, Ethan Walker, as the golden child. He was charismatic, confident, the kind of guy who could convince strangers he'd invented electricity if he smiled long enough. I was the opposite. I worked quietly, built a small construction company from nothing, paid my bills, visited our parents every Sunday. Dad used to joke, "If the roof caves in, call Noah. If you need someone to sell the house afterward, call Ethan." Everyone laughed. Looking back, maybe Dad wasn't joking. I'm glad to have you here tonight. Please follow my story until the very end and comment below with the city you are watching from so I can see exactly how far my story has reached. Our father, Richard Walker, died after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. The funeral felt unreal. For the first time in months, Ethan cried, or at least he looked convincing. He hugged everyone, accepted condolences, spoke about honoring Dad's legacy. Then before the flowers outside the church had even begun to wilt, he called me. "We need to talk." His voice sounded strangely cheerful. "What about?" "The will, of course." Dad had spent 40 years building a successful commercial contracting company. When he retired, he sold it for several $1,000,000. The estate included investment accounts, 2 properties, and enough savings that neither Ethan nor I would ever have to worry about retirement. Dad always promised everything would be divided equally. 50-50, simple, fair, I never questioned it. Apparently Ethan had. 2 days before the lawyer planned to read the will, Ethan invited me to his house. His wife, Melissa, answered the door but wouldn't meet my eyes. That should have been my first warning. Inside, Ethan had already arranged papers across the dining table. A private investigator's report, old family photos, copies of Dad's medical records. "What is this?" I asked. He folded his hands together. "I think you're not Dad's biological son." For several seconds, I honestly thought he was joking. Then I realized nobody else was smiling. "What are you talking about?" He slid an old photograph toward me, Mom standing beside a man I'd never seen. The back reads, "Summer 1988, my birth year." "I hired someone," Ethan said. "They found evidence Mom dated another man before marrying Dad." I laughed. "You hired an investigator after Dad died?" "I hired him while Dad was sick." The room suddenly felt colder. "You what?" I needed answers. "No," I said. "You wanted money." Melissa finally spoke. "Ethan," he ignored her. "If you're not his biological son, you shouldn't inherit half the estate." I stared at him. "You've already decided I'm not Dad's kid. I'm saying we should prove it." "You mean accuse Mom of cheating after she's been dead for 6 years? His jaw tightened. "If that's what happened." I wanted to hit him, instead I stood. Dad had taught us something when we were boys, never make permanent decisions while angry, so I picked up my coat. "We're done." Before I reached the door, Ethan called after me. "If you refuse the DNA test, I'll challenge the will in court." I turned around. "You drag Dad's name through court, if I have to." For 3 straight nights I barely slept, not because I doubted Dad, because I couldn't believe my own brother. Friends told me to ignore him. Lawyers told me he'd probably lose, but court cases take years. They destroy families, drain estates. Dad would have hated it. Finally, I agreed to the test. Not because Ethan deserved proof, because Dad deserved peace. The testing company collected DNA from me using a cheek swab. Dad's sample came from preserved hospital records authorized by the executor. Everything was handled legally. The technician smiled politely. "Results usually take about 2 weeks." Those 14 days became the longest of my life. People started whispering. Family friends stopped calling. A cousin texted, "I heard Ethan found something." Another asked if Mom had been hiding secrets. I stopped answering messages. Every rumor felt like another insult to parents who couldn't defend themselves. One afternoon, Dad's oldest friend, Frank Donovan, showed up at my office carrying coffee. "I heard what's happening." I nodded. "I'm sorry." He looked genuinely heartbroken. "Your father would have been devastated." I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Did Dad ever suspect anything?" Frank looked offended. "Richard loved you more than life itself." "That's not what I asked." He leaned closer. "Noah," his voice became firm, "I knew your father 45 years. If he had even one doubt, I'd know." That conversation helped, at least for a few hours. Then something strange happened. Melissa called me, secretly. "Can we meet?" I almost refused. Instead, we met at a small cafe across town. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking around a coffee cup. "Ethan doesn't know I'm here." "I figured." She swallowed hard. He's obsessed. I noticed. She looked around before speaking again. He found something else. What? I don't know. He won't tell me. But he's been searching through old hospital records. What records? I asked. He said if he's right. She stopped talking. If who's right? Melissa whispered. It changes everything. That sentence stayed in my head for days, not because it answered anything, because it created an even bigger mystery. What could possibly be bigger than proving whether I was Dad's son? I was about to find out, and when the DNA results finally arrived, they didn't just answer Ethan's question. They destroyed the identity he'd spent 41 years believing was his own. The executor scheduled everyone to meet on a rainy Thursday morning. It was supposed to be simple. Read the DNA report. Read Dad's will. Settle the estate. Instead, it became the day my entire family history was rewritten. The conference room was silent, except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Ethan sat across from me wearing the same smug expression he'd had for weeks. Melissa looked miserable. Our father's attorney, Daniel Harris, waited until everyone was seated before placing 2 sealed envelopes on the table. I want everyone to understand, he said calmly. These documents contain sensitive information. Ethan leaned forward. Let's just get it over with. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. I don't think you'll feel that way in a few minutes. He opened the first envelope. The laboratory has confirmed that Noah Walker is the biological son of Richard Walker with a probability exceeding 99.99%. For a second, nobody moved. Then I closed my eyes. The weight I'd been carrying for weeks disappeared instantly. Dad had always been my father, exactly as I'd known in my heart. I looked toward Ethan. Instead of disappointment, I expected anger. What I saw instead was confusion, because Daniel hadn't finished reading. The laboratory also performed the comparison requested by the court regarding Ethan Walker. Daniel hesitated. This report concludes that Ethan Walker is not the biological child of Richard Walker. The room went completely silent. Even the rain seemed to disappear. Ethan laughed. A short, nervous laugh. That's impossible. Daniel quietly slid the report across the table. It has been independently verified. No, Ethan grabbed the papers. This has to be wrong. He flipped through every page, every chart, every signature. His breathing became faster. This isn't possible. Melissa reached for his arm. Ethan. He pulled away. No, he slammed the report onto the table. Run another test. Daniel nodded. We already anticipated that request. He opened another folder. A second laboratory confirmed the exact same results. Ethan looked at me as if somehow I had arranged everything. You did this. I almost laughed. You hired the investigator. You demanded the DNA test. You dragged us here. You did this to yourself. Then Daniel reached for the second envelope. I'm afraid there's more. Ethan stared at him. What more could there possibly be? Daniel unfolded a handwritten letter. It was left by Richard Walker with instructions that it only be opened if someone challenged Noah's place in the family. Every hair on my arm stood up. Dad knew. Somehow, Dad knew this day might come. Daniel began reading. If you're hearing this letter, it means someone cared more about my money than my family. My chest tightened. That sounded exactly like Dad. I raised 2 boys, one by blood, one by choice. Ethan's eyes widened. Mine did too. I learned the truth about Ethan 20 years ago. The room exploded. What? Ethan shot to his feet. He knew. Daniel continued reading. Your mother came to me crying. She confessed she'd had a brief relationship shortly before we married. Melissa covered her mouth. I couldn't breathe. Dad's letter continued. She begged me to leave. I looked at 6-month-old Ethan sleeping in his crib. He was innocent. From that moment forward, he became my son. Tears filled my eyes. That sounded exactly like the man who raised us. Daniel kept reading. I never loved Ethan less because we didn't share DNA. Being a father has never been about biology. It's about showing up every single day. I looked across the table. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like he was in the room with us. Then came the sentence that changed everything. The only thing that could ever make Ethan lose his inheritance is if he chose greed over family. Daniel stopped reading. He reached for another document. Ethan, our father added a legal amendment. The amendment was brutally simple. If either son attempted to fraudulently remove the other from the inheritance through false accusations or malicious legal action, that son would automatically forfeit his share. The forfeited portion would be donated to children's hospitals and veterans' charities. Neither brother would receive it. Ethan stared blankly. No, Daniel nodded. You filed legal paperwork claiming Noah was attempting inheritance fraud. Those filings triggered this clause. You voluntarily activated it. You can't do that, Ethan shouted. Daniel calmly answered. He already did. It's legally enforceable. I've confirmed it twice. In one moment, Ethan lost nearly $4 million, not because of me, because of the trap he walked into himself. Dad hadn't punished him for being born to another man. He punished him for trying to destroy his own brother. The meeting ended without another word. Melissa quietly stood. "I'm sorry, Noah. You never deserved any of this." She walked away. Ethan remained frozen in his chair, still staring at the letter, still hoping reality would change. It never did. Over the next few months, everything collapsed around him. News spread through the family faster than anyone expected. The same relatives who had believed Ethan's rumors now learned the truth. Many apologized to me. Almost none spoke to Ethan anymore, not because of the DNA, because of what he'd done. His business partners learned about the lawsuit. Investors began asking uncomfortable questions. If he'd manipulate his own family over money, what would he do to them? Within 6 months, 2 major contracts disappeared. A year later, his company filed for bankruptcy. Melissa finally left, not because Ethan wasn't Richard's biological son. She told me herself, "I married a man who loved his family. I don't recognize the man who tried to destroy it." They divorced quietly. No dramatic courtroom battle, just years of trust finally running out. One afternoon, almost 2 years later, I visited Dad's grave. I brought fresh flowers and something else, his letter. I read it again, especially one sentence. "Blood creates relatives. Character creates family." I finally understood why Dad had written it. He wasn't trying to expose anyone. He was protecting the family he hoped we'd become. As I stood there, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was Ethan. He looked older than his 43 years. His expensive suits were gone. His confidence had vanished. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "I hated you." "I know. I thought Dad loved you more." I looked at the headstone. "He loved us differently. Not more." Ethan sat on the grass. "I spent my whole life trying to earn something I already had. You had Dad. You threw him away before he was even gone." Tears rolled down his face. "I know, they weren't worth it. No amount of money was." He handed me a folded envelope. "I wrote something." Inside was a letter addressed to me. It wasn't asking for money. It wasn't asking for forgiveness. It was simply an apology. Several pages long, every lie, every accusation, every rumor. He admitted all of it. Signed at the bottom were 6 words. "You were always my real brother." Forgiveness isn't a light switch. It doesn't happen in a moment. I couldn't erase what he'd done, the weeks of humiliation, the whispers, the pain he'd caused our parents' memory. But I also remembered Dad's letter. Being family wasn't about DNA. It was about choices, and for the first time in years. Ethan had made the right one. I reached out my hand. He looked surprised. "You don't have to forgive me." "I know, but I'm tired of carrying your mistakes." He slowly shook my hand. Neither of us smiled. Some wounds heal quietly. Today, Dad's money is mostly gone, just as he hoped. The charities named in his will have built pediatric treatment rooms and funded programs for veterans rebuilding their lives. Every year I receive updates showing exactly where those donations went. I think Dad would have been proud. His fortune ended up helping people who truly needed it. Sometimes people ask whether the DNA test ruined my brother's life. I always give the same answer. No, the DNA test only revealed the truth, the choices that destroyed his life. Those were entirely his own, and that's the difference between justice and revenge. Justice reveals who people really are. Revenge simply gives them the chance to prove it.